Well, thank you very much. Maybe the proximate start of this is the British Empire. It learned from Britain. Britain undoubtedly was an empire. At its peak, it controlled about 1/4 of the inhabited land area of the world, and was extremely powerful and extremely nasty from my point of view. I loved the British when I was young because they spoke such wonderful English. And they do. They speak better English than I do. It's their language, but Americans use it. And that very wonderful language masked a lot of tremendously cruel empire, as empires are. Very violent, very much determined to dominate, very much neglectful of the lives of those that the empire dominated, leaving millions of people to die in famines in Ireland in the 1840s or in India in the 1870s to 1890s, what's been called the late Victorian Holocausts. These were El Nino related famines, but then were supervised by harsh imperialists who didn't care as millions of Indians were dying. And of course, Britain pioneered in concentration camps in Africa, in many wars of conquest, in many cynical wars. The most cynical that I know of in modern history is the war on China to demand the right to export British opium, India-grown British opium, to China, where the Chinese authorities were perfectly clear this was leading to addictions and social problems, and it literally had as one cause of war, Britain's demand that China accept and become addicted under our demands. Well, all of this is, and another very cynical war was the Crimean War. The Crimean War was a war led by Britain to weaken Russia, to drive Russia, and especially the Russian fleet, from the Black Sea, and to weaken Russia sufficiently that Britain thought that Russia would then not threaten British imperial possessions. And one of their concerns, which was mostly delusional anyway, was that Russia would invade India through the Khyber Pass. And the Crimean War was a war to put Russia in its place. I call the current war in Ukraine the second Crimean, an identical structural purpose, this time the US and the UK trying to put Russia in its place. So I start with Britain because the US took over the British style. And I would say that empire is an appropriate word, but the American empire is a different kind of empire. The American empire is an empire in the sense that the American government has actively determined who rules in other countries. As a natural point that the US can overthrow another country's government if that other country's government is deemed to be inimical to US interests in some way. And there have been perhaps 100 covert regime change operations by the US, largely the CIA, but not only. And those have extended from 1947 until today. The lesson is that they get us into terrible crises, and they get the target countries into prolonged instability and crises. And because they are, by design, deniable by the US government, there's almost no awareness or discussion of the underlying causes of such wars. And I'll give two examples. One is the Syrian. Americans don't pay too much attention to the rest of the world anyway, but they may have heard that there there's a war in Syria, and they would say, well, yes, because there's a Syrian despot, and that led to a civil war. I doubt that 1 in 1,000 would know that President Obama signed an order in 2012 to overthrow the Syrian government, and already in 2011 began to arm an insurgency to overthrow the Syrian government. I know from my diplomatic roles that a peace agreement was reached in 2012 to end the civil strife in Syria, but that the United States blocked it. So the war now has gone on for 14 years openly, from 2011 to, or 13 years to 2024, with hundreds of thousands of dead. Nobody knows, nobody cares, nobody reports on it, nobody knows the CIA role. Once in a while we hear Vladimir Putin entered Syria in 2015 without even the minimal notice. Well, yes, the United States was there 4 years before. So this is a typical kind of action. Another example to bring us closer to our immediate crisis is Ukraine. The mainstream media that the war in Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022, when Vladimir Putin, in an unprovoked manner, a fantasy of a description. The war started 10 years ago. It started 8 years before its ostensible start date, because it started in February 24th, February 22nd, 2014. The sitting president had the temerity to say that, this is sitting president of Ukraine, excuse me, had the temerity to say that Ukraine would be neutral rather than a NATO country. And that was a cause for the United States to overthrow Yanukovych, together with extreme nationalist militaries and paramilitaries in Ukraine. And this installed an anti-Russian, indeed Russophobic regime in Kiev, and the war began then. Bombing, and then a negotiated settlement called the Minsk Agreements, which was repudiated by the US and the Ukrainians. So basic facts like the Syrian and the Ukrainian cases are not actually known or discussed in the United States, which is why you and I are surprised when we learn them, because these are big events. You would think that a newspaper like the New York Times, which has a storied reputation, would be doing investigative reporting, would find out what's the real story, would take pride in a Pulitzer Prize quality expose. Why did the US overthrow a regime? Well, it's exactly not do that reporting. They block that reporting. They prevent it from happening. And so we don't hear the truth on almost anything. So I call this the US empire, because an empire means when a powerful state has control outside of its own state. It could be a direct colonial possession. The US has a few of those, but mainly the US has an archipelago of military bases around the world in 80 countries or so, and around 750 military bases. It has CIA secret sites all over the world. It has regime change operations all over the world. And I count that as an empire. And I find that the behavior of this empire is not very smart. If it were, one could resent it and say how clever and evil and perfidious it is, but it's worse than that. The American behavior is destructive, wasteful, leading to American deaths, leading to millions of deaths of others, leading to trillions of dollars of outlays that are paid for on debt. So the wars have been a major contributor to a rising public debt in the United States. The supply chains have been disrupted globally. There's no benefit to any of this to anybody. Certainly not the target countries, not the U.S. itself. Maybe the benefits, which are real and some people claim are the ultimate aim, are the military contracts for the military contractors. So yes, there are war profiteers, and I don't want to actually in any way deny that that is one motivation. But I think that there is, in addition to the war profiteering of the military-industrial complex, a hubris, an arrogance, a disdain for the rest of the world, and a general belief in American superiority in this security state that we have, not the public, but this narrow driving, very, very dangerous and bad behavior.
Influenced by a regime change threat or by that there is ideologies and concepts. If you remember that Charlie Wilson's War,
yes,
where Tom Hanks.
It's a very good question of the motivations, the behaviors, and the continuation or continuity of this American security state. And I happened to recently have a good long discussion with a talented political scientist named Aaron Good, who wrote his PhD dissertation and then published it on explaining what is the American deep state. Is it real? Is it a proper concept? Is it a conspiracy theory? What is it exactly? And he recommends a three-part structure of the state, that is the apparatus of power in the United States, that I find construct. First, there is the visible state. He calls it the Madisonian state because James Madison wrote the Constitution. We have a president, we have a Congress, we have a Supreme Court, we have an election for the House of Representatives every 2 years, for the president every 4 years, and so forth. And those politicians exist and they vote the laws, they vote the budget, and so forth. Then there is what's sometimes called the permanent state, or sometimes called the deep state. He uses the term the security state. And the security state is long-term professionals, if you will, who run the security apparatus of the United States. What is the security apparatus? Well, it's $1 trillion basically, and related military outlays. $1 trillion is not nothing. It's a pretty big operation. It supports, as I said, overseas military bases in 80 countries. It supports the Pentagon. It supports hundreds of billions of dollars, interestingly, in military contracts each year with the likes of Boeing or Lockheed Martin or what was Raytheon, now renamed, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. So the major, and of course the CIA and the intelligence community. And the CIA is distinctive in that it is a military or quasi-military unit of the United States, but it operates in secrecy by design. And it operates almost without any accountability at all, because what is supposed to be accountable is operations to intelligence committees in the Congress, but basically those committees are there to support the CIA rather than to oversee the CIA. The second category is this $1 trillion a year military machine. And to my mind, it's always ready for war. It likes war, wants war, wants to test new weapon systems, wants to show American might, wants to scare the wits out of little countries, wants to be present for regime changes where and when it's needed. Then there is a third component, which Aaron Good calls by a variety of names. One is the deep state, even though what he means by it is not security state. He means it's the bankers, it's Wall Street, it's the oil industry, it's those who ostensibly profit by America's reach around the world with the security state making it safe for pipelines, for oil ownership, for regulatory control, for placement of military bases, and so on. And the other names that he uses as in juxtaposition to the underworld, which plays its role with the security state because organized crime and the CIA work hand in hand and have for decades. Yes, but this is known. They've been involved in drug trafficking. They've used the mafia for assassinations. It's a bit of a mess, and he calls this third component the overworld, and in a way, it is it's Marx's idea for who is all of this done, who benefits from all of this, and that's our billionaires and our tech industry, which is both a source of power for the security state, but also is enriched by it in its own ways. You know this world very well. There are huge Pentagon contracts. There are huge tie-ins with the National Security Administration and so on. There's all of the things that Snowden revealed about the back doors to all our data, thank you, and all the information. There's Mark Zuckerberg telling us recently, yes, the government and we worked together to make sure certain things wouldn't be on Facebook. Sorry about that. So there's a lot of tie-ins. It used to be Big Oil and Wall Street were the quintessential partners in this, much less so the tech world, but now tech is the dominant part of our economy. And so it also has its tie-ins because it's partly militarized and but the point is that we should think about three levels of government: our politicians, our permanent security apparatus, which is very big, and our interested industry, which is aligned in contracts, power, regulation, secrecy, surveillance, and other areas. This is not textbook civics of 7th grade, how a bill becomes a law. This is some ground reality that has a lot of unpleasantness to it, but I think helps to account for why we're in perpetual wars, why my whole lifetime has been Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, Sudan, Somalia, you name it. We have a big war machine. We have a big regime change operation. We have a big secrecy security apparatus. We have a big surveillance apparatus. It's not what we signed up to with James Madison's Constitution.
Correct.
And there's a wonderful, wonderful, my wife doesn't like me to use that word when I refer to President Putin's statements. I will say just very accurate. And that is in an interview that President Putin gave to Le Figaro in 2017, he has an observation which I found very astute or very accurate. He said, I've dealt with 3 presidents now. He says they come to office with ideas, but then soon enough, the men in dark suits and blew the way the world really is. And that is why things continue as they are, essentially, no matter who is in office. And I think that there is a great deal of truth to that. When I look at foreign policy from Clinton, who was a Democrat, it's the economy, stupid, but he was the one that initiated the NATO enlargement. He bombed Serbia in 1999 for 78 straight days. Then George W. Bush Jr., who had the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who further enlarged NATO and then committed NATO to expand to include Ukraine and Georgia. Then Obama, the man of peace, the man who won the Nobel Peace Prize right at the start. And then he signs the order for the overthrow of the Syrian government. He invokes NATO to overthrow the Libyan government. He sends Victoria Nuland to overthrow the Ukrainian government. This is not proper behavior or in line with the public perceptions and precepts. Then Trump. Well, he continues the arming of Ukraine. He, of course, doubles down on Israel in the Israel-Palestine disaster and tragedy, making things work. He rejects Iran, which would have denuclearized Iran in return for dropping U.S. sanctions. So he leaves the world less safe. Then Biden, who's supposedly the opposite of Trump, comes in. And what does he do? He refuses to negotiate with Russia. He relishes the Ukraine wars leading to Finland and Sweden joining NATO. He continues to pledge at disastrous cost to you. It leads to ongoing war. It leads to destruction of Ukraine. It leads to the impossibility of a peace agreement. And that's Biden's policy. So that's 5 presidents in a row that I think have made me much less safe than we were in 1992 when the Russians had just become independent and said, we want to be friends with you. Get in line and, respect us because we're going to run the show now. And this is essentially our circumstance. We are more in danger, but every president, supposedly left or right, basically has listened to the men in the dark suits and blue ties. Well, I think what we see in Gaza is a complete, blatant, shocking exposure to the false values and utter hypocrisy of the United States and the West regarding human rights, international law, claims about genocide, and so on. And to go back, the U.S. has been making a claim that China is committing a genocide in Western China, in Xinjiang province, which is a province in the west of China. I have been to Xinjiang. I've written about this. There is no genocide going on. This is a publicity psyops of the United States. It's China's the adversary. It's trying to paint China in a false but very harsh light. And it used the word genocide in the State Department human rights reports and got a lot of notice, and Western parliaments also in Canada and elsewhere repeated, yes, this is a genocide. No deaths reported, by the way. No, but various claims, but no deaths. Then comes a real genocide before our eyes, where a tightly packed 2 million people in a tiny strip along the Mediterranean, the Gaza Strip, are bombed out of their homes, hospitals destroyed, schools destroyed, universities destroyed, all caught on video feed every day. And official count of 40,000 dead, multiples of that, people very hunger, dying of deprivation, dying of disease. And what is the U.S. position? We support 100% Israel's security. Shocking, but as you say, a complete expose. There are no standards here. Even genocide can be excused at the stage of the White House or the State Department, basically smirked away, and the U.S. providing the weapon systems to carry out this genocide. So I had become, of course, a critic of this many years ago, and on a growing basis, because I learn more and more, even in recent days, of things that I didn't know about that are absolutely disgusting in U.S. foreign policy. But this one, like you say, is so vivid and dramatic that the world is watching as the U.S. is seemingly able to justify any level of cruelty and suffering. And even when accounts of torture, verified accounts come out of Israel, say that's just fine, because essentially the people that are being tortured are effectively being treated as subhuman. But the United States does nothing except continue to provide the bombs, the financing, the weaponry, the artillery, all of the rest of the killing apparatus. Why? Well, a variety of reasons. One, the U.S. security state and the Israeli security state are completely intertwined. Even when there are negotiations ostensibly about a ceasefire, who are the representatives? Very typically, it's the heads of the CIA and Mossad. It shows, very often, you'll read a report in recent weeks that there's going to be another round of ceasefire negotiations, and the CIA director and head of Mossad will be meeting in the Emirates or Qatar or another place. And I'm shocked by it also. The CIA is, by name, of course, an intelligence agency, not a negotiator, not part of our democratic institutions. It has no place, in my view, in these negotiations, but it's there because the security state actually is the dominant part of that tripartite state. First, and to explain, nobody asked the U.S. citizen or explained any of this. So,
explained? What do you mean?
Nobody told the U.S. citizen, oh, by the way, we're going to do the following regime change operations. It'll be in your name. We're going to go to war. There's no real reason for the war, but we really want to get rid of that son of a bitch Gaddafi. And so we're going to say that it's to protect the civilians of Benghazi. In other words, the Americans are not asked their opinion. They're not brought into any kind of confidence. Nothing is explained to them beforehand, during, or afterward. So this is the first point. The American people are, when the Americans were involved in foreign policy in the 1960s, in that young men were being drafted to go to Vietnam, the solution, quote unquote, was go to a professional army, so that nastiness over the draft where you have to explain, why are you shipping me out? Or why did my son come home in a body bag? You don't have to do that now. Now it's all just a pay base. We often use foreign mercenaries. We often pay foreign paramilitaries to do the bidding, and so forth. So this is really the first point. The American people don't even know this phenomenon has happened. It's related, I find, to the famed historical experience of the Roman Republic becoming the Roman Empire. Some people date it to the 1st century BC, when a number of generals rose to challenge the power of the Roman Senate. Some people date it to Julius Caesar, 44 BC, killed. Some people say that it is formally when Augustus became the princeps, the emperor, in 27 BC, that's when the change came. But essentially, the Roman Senate continued, but it was then men in togas enjoying their prerogatives and their high class rather than taking decisions of state after the empire began. That point on foreign policy decades ago, where the state does not ask the public, does not inform the public, and does not expect any need or constraint on U.S. action. Did the American people approve our role in Gaza or in Ukraine? No. Well, okay, there was one vote of some funding, but not based on any real discussion about what we're doing, what the choices are, what the alternatives are. None of that. It was something that was pushed through and, of course, made possible by the vast financing contributions, in that case, of the Israel lobby. So this is, to my mind, deeply disheartening. We don't have any sense of democratic institutions functioning when it comes to foreign affairs.
It's unacceptable. I'm sure.
I think we are at the end of even the appearance of American unipolarity, as it was called, from 1992 onward. In 1992, the Soviet Union had ended. It had become 15 successor states, and the declaration at the time was, now we are the colossus, the unchallenged power in the world. We are the most powerful country that ever ruled the world. We're more powerful than the Roman Empire. We're more powerful than the British Empire. And a lot of senior American officials believed that, took it to heart. This was the unipolar era, the end of history, though that meant something slightly different, but in effect, it was the US-led world. Back then, its plausibility was that Russia was extremely weak. China was not a factor in the world scene. India was extremely poor. There seemed to be no even potential challengers of US power. But, of course, even back then, the US was 4% or so of the world population, and the other 96% of the world population wasn't exactly signing off, determining their governments, leading their way, going to war with them whenever the US saw fit, and so on. So this idea of unipolarity was delusional already back in 1992. But we are now more than 30 years later. China has become, by some standards, a larger economy than the United States, if you measure it using purchasing power-adjusted prices. India has become the third largest economy in the world because it's the #1 most populous country in the world. Russia clearly is a sophisticated industrial economy that can fight a massive army built by the US and its allies and armed by the US and its allies. And Russia is winning on the battlefield. And that shows that Russia is also a very substantial economy and one of the world's largest. So I think it's impossible to say in 2024 that there is any kind of unipolarity. Now, this doesn't sit well with the United States. The most basic thing that most in Washington want to do is get back to a situation where American dominance is undoubted. Defeat Putin. Put China in its place. Well, I regard this as a combination, again, of extraordinarily dangerous, because Russia and China and India, by the way, are not going to be put in their place. And if the U.S. really pushed on that, well, we're going to end up in nuclear war. And we need to understand, stop it. Don't push other nuclear superpowers. First principle, every day when you wake up, do not provoke a nuclear war. This is my first advice. And it's not heeded right now by the U.S., but it's our current reality. And I'm hoping that this reality becomes understood inside the United States quickly, as it already has become understood outside of the United States. No. Not 90 seconds to midnight.
We are 90.
Half of 3 minutes. This is the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And what I resent is that back in 1992, it was 17 minutes from midnight is still nerve-wracking. But every U.S. president has brought it closer to midnight. And now we are just 90 seconds from midnight, according to this metaphor. And especially the United States idea, the arrogance. We're so powerful, we don't have to listen to any other power. We can do what we want. And that has shown up in two extraordinarily dangerous places in recent years. One is in Ukraine, where the U.S. has said, of course we can put missiles, military bases into what will be a NATO country. And it has shown up in Taiwan, where the United States is sending armaments to Taiwan over the heated objections of the country that rules China and that we have acknowledged to be the government, that rules China, including Taiwan. But we're saying both to Russia and China, we don't hear red lines, we don't hear you. We are the United States. We don't have to hear you. That's what the U.S. is saying. Of course, it's extraordinarily dangerous. I want the United States to be safe and secure and not imperial. I want the United States to have the idea that we live within our borders, that we don't need overseas military bases, that we governments of other countries, and that we are safe because we have a powerful defense sector, but it's really defense. And we don't seek or have enemies, we seek our security. And I regard America as potentially the safest place in the world. Two big oceans separating us from powers of Asia or Europe, including potential adversaries, and an extraordinarily powerful military. Except for one thing. A nuclear war will destroy everything. And the only way I believe we will get to a nuclear war is if we continue to act with profound disrespect and disregard for other countries, and notably for other major powers, in which I include Russia, China, India, and others that are potential threats. The way I want to diffuse the threats is, yes, to have deterrence, to have the oceans, but to have normal, respectful relations with other countries. And this, I believe, is possible. I believe it's absolutely urgent. I believe increasing risk, not decreasing risk. I bemoan the fact that the president for whom I voted in 2020 has not made the world and the U.S. safer. Biden has made the world and the U.S. less safe. I'm hoping very much, and hoping to work towards it, that the security state, the overworld, the powerful entities finally say to the politicians, it's enough. We don't have to behave in such reckless and provocative behavior, and we won't anymore.